This is the ML Astro SAL-33 strain wave mount, and I got it in gray specifically to match my shirt. This weighs about 5.3 kilograms and it handled my ASCAR 131F like a champ, along with all of my imaging gear, which all came out to about 14 kilograms, and it gave me some of the best guiding that I've ever seen here in Boston. I can take this mount apart and put it back together in less than 5 minutes, and it took me about 5 months to get to this point in this review, and I almost asked for the return policy near the beginning, and I obviously didn't, mainly because of the excellent support that Min and his team at ML Astro provide. I'll tell you more about my saga with what happened with this cursed mount later on in this video. And as a disclaimer, this is not a review or a test mount. I bought this outright. I paid about $1,099 for the mount itself. I got the pure extension, which was $149, and I paid the extra $20 for the laser etching, which is probably one of my most favorite features. I love looking at this thing. And about $210 in shipping. The order process and the shipping process was super easy. I actually placed the order for batch 4, but I was already in conversation with Min about questions about this mount, and then he told me that somebody canceled from batch 2. Do I want it? Well, yeah, why wouldn't I want my mount faster? So taking a closer look, this has a dual saddle that supports both Vixen and Lost Mandy style plates. And last week, Min sent me the extended knobs here so I can actually use a Lost Mandy plate. It was really easy to install, so thanks Min for sending this to me so quickly. I also love that there are some home markers on the mount on 3 sides, so you can actually rotate the head 90 degrees in either direction and set that as home, which is great if you want to set up multiple telescopes side by side. Going down, another feature that the SAL-33 likes to tout is the zero shift alt-az adjustments. The threading here is super fine on both the altitude and the azimuth knobs. On both sides here, you can see the degree markers that goes from 0 to 90 degrees. And if for some reason you can't get to your latitude, you'll see that there's a bolt on this side and there's one on the other side as well. So loosen that. You can move the mount a little bit manually. Just make sure you give it enough room so that the altitude knob has enough room to move back and forth, and you'll be able to reach your latitude. The pier itself is super solid. It attaches to the ZWO plate really easily on this TC40 tripod. It is extremely lightweight, so it makes setting up outside really easy. So I can lift this with just my hand, just hold it up. And when I did receive the mount and the pier extension, unfortunately the locking knobs here were not included. They were forgotten. So I did tell Min and he replaced them within a couple of weeks. But for the first few weeks that I was using it, luckily I had 3 M6 bolts lying around, so I was able to use that. So I would have to use a hex wrench to take the plate on and off. There's also a bubble level here, and under the mount there's a threaded hole for counterweight shaft that you have to purchase separately. Now the side here has a 12 volt 3 amp port. They recommend a 5 amp power supply, an ST4 port, and a USB-B port along with a power button. I also printed the Ioptron iPolar mount for easy polar alignment. I'll have a follow-up video going over polar alignment using the Ioptron iPolar, using Nina's 3-point polar alignment and SharpCap's polar alignment tool, and we'll see which one is accurate. And of course on the other side, we have my logo, which matches my t-shirt. Now the build quality of this is really excellent. I tested this with a handful of telescopes, including my Edge 8, my ASCAR 71F, 91F, 120 Apo, and finally the 131F, which is the newest of the bunch, which is my heaviest so far, weighing at about 14 kilograms with everything installed on it. And this thing handled it pretty easily. I run the 71F and the 91F without counterweights, they're light enough, but with the 120 Apo and the 131F, I use a counterweight not because this can't handle it, but because I don't want the tripod to tip over. As much as I trust the TC40 tripod, it's still a light carbon fiber tripod, so I just don't want to take the risk. But otherwise, according to this chart, I could have run all of them without counterweights without any problems, if only I had a pier. And on top of that, they do recommend no more than 75% of the allowable load for astrophotography, so a counterweight does help with that. So the control board does come with a Wi-Fi module, so you can connect to it remotely from your phone. You can also connect it to your home network, so you can control it from another computer at your house, which is really nice. And the module also comes with a built-in web page that you can visit to do configuration changes ranging from resetting the home position, setting the latitude and longitude, changing from EQ mode to Alt-Az mode, to fork mode, and a couple other configuration changes. And this uses OnStep X as the firmware to control the mount, which is great because OnStep is an open source program. And one of the things I really like about ML Astro, what they're doing with OnStep X, is that they actually contribute back to OnStep X. So they work collaboratively with the program, with the project, which is really nice to see, especially as an open source developer myself. Since this uses OnStep X, there's also a mobile app for OnStep that you can use to connect to this. It's a little bit clunky, but it works well on Wi-Fi for me. It can also connect to Bluetooth, but I've never been able to control this through Bluetooth. And maybe it's just me, but I don't care enough about Bluetooth to connect to it to try and troubleshoot why it doesn't work for me. Wi-Fi works fine for me, and most of the time I use a USB cable and control it with Nina. And ML Astro did recently release their own OnStep app for the iPhone, so it's available on iOS. I don't have that. I think their Android app is in the works and is coming out soon, so I'll give that a shot when it comes out. But I don't really use it for mobile. Every once in a while I'll connect to manually slew it if I need to because I don't have the hand controller. But other than that, I'm happy with how it works over Wi-Fi and over Nina. And speaking of Nina, since this is OnStep, it has a native ASCOM driver that you use, so connecting to Nina is super easy. All in all, for the price of this, even with the recent price increase to $12.49, I think this punches way above its weight class, and it's really good to see. So I'm kind of glad I got it in a purchase when I did before the price increase. I do kind of wish I bought this during the first batch, mainly because it would have been $100 less. And I don't think there were any significant issues with the first batch, except for maybe some of the belts were a little too loose, but that's easy to change, easy to update. But I ordered it for batch 4, got it in batch 2, so no regrets. Well, some regrets. And ML Astro claims that this mount is user serviceable, and as you saw, I am full proof that it is completely user serviceable, so that part is true. And even with the price increase, I think that this mount is still worth it. I think it's still underpriced for the amount of performance that it can do when it works. Now let's talk about the saga that I had to deal with the SAL-33 since I got it. Before I go into that, I just want to repeat myself and say that all of my issues have been resolved, so none of them are outstanding. I still have this. I did not actually go ahead and ask for the refund, although there were times I did get frustrated and I was like, my next email is going to be, how do I return this thing and get my money back? But I didn't, and I'm really glad that I didn't because I really do enjoy this now, especially since it's been working really well. I've only had 14 sessions with it. I'm hoping to get another 14,000 with it if I can. Am I going to be alive that long? But anyways, I mentioned that batch 2 was kind of cursed, and I think this mount specifically was double cursed. My first session was filled with guiding errors. No matter what settings I played with in PhD2, I could not get the line to stay straight. I don't consider myself an expert in anything, but I am pretty experienced with PhD2, with mounts and telescopes. I do know how to play with the settings. I did say that this was the first strain wave mount that I've owned, but it's not the first strain wave mount that I've used, so I do have an idea of how they work. So it was a little bit frustrating when my first session just didn't go as expected. I couldn't get good subs. And then when I put my ears to the mount, I started hearing this grinding noise. It's kind of unusual, so I emailed Min right away, and he responded back immediately. Like literally 11 minutes after I sent the email, he wrote back, and he asked, "Are you available for a Zoom meeting soon?" And less than 7 hours later, I was on a Zoom call with Min where he walked me through how to open the panels so that I can access the belts, because he suspected that maybe the belts were a little bit too tight, or the RA belt was a little bit too tight, because in batch 1, they were a little bit too loose, so in batch 2, naturally, things came a little bit too tight. So I loosened it up, put it back together, turned it on while Min was still watching me on Zoom, and what do you know? The grinding noise was gone. Fixed, yay! The next session a couple days later, I set it up outside. I do a little bit of testing. I don't hear a grinding noise. Great, I'm very happy with it. I turn it on. After an hour or so, the guiding charts just looked terrible again. I put my ears to it and I hear the grinding noise again. I said, what's happening? So after some more troubleshooting and some more back and forth with Min, he suspects that it could have been the magnetic brake not working properly. So he asked me a few times to turn it off and then turn it on again and hear this click. And I heard it every time. And that what that means is that when it's on, that brake just basically disengages so that the mount can move freely. And when it loses power, the brake collapses or shuts itself so that the mount doesn't sag over. But as you heard, I heard the clicks over and over again. So for almost the entire month of February, I had guiding issues. I was trying to work on this video. I was trying to work on other videos. I just couldn't because I was just spending a lot of my time troubleshooting, and that was pretty frustrating. And it was one of the times where I was like, maybe I should just take my CEM40 out, put this away, and maybe ask for my money back. But we kept troubleshooting, we kept trying different things, and then one day I noticed that when my mount was on the west side of the pier, everything was fine. The guiding numbers were kind of perfect, and I thought maybe it was fixed. And then I moved to something where my mount needed to be on the east side of the pier, and what do you know, guiding issues and the grinding noise. So it seemed like whenever the mount was on the east side of the pier, something was happening and it was making noise. So I took recordings of the grinding noise, sent it to Min, and he suspected that it's probably the brake. You should take the brake out. So that's what I did. I opened this up. We didn't need to go on a Zoom call because at that point I opened this up probably a dozen times at least, trying to play with the belt. So I was pretty familiar with it. Removed the brakes, and what do you know, the next session, all my guiding issues were fixed. So it was indeed the brake that was causing the issue. So it was this little bugger that was causing me so many issues. This is the magnetic brake. You can kind of see the magnet things in the middle right there. So it turns out that in the cold, the magnetic brake fails to fully release when it turns on when your mount is on the east side of the pier. That's when I guess some gravity pulls down on the brakes, and it kind of just doesn't work properly. And when it was on the west side of the pier, it was on the other side and it wasn't feeling the tension. So once I removed this, it was great, but keeping in mind that if I do turn the power off, I need to make sure that my mount is at home so that the weight of the telescope doesn't make it sag down a little bit. So Min said he would send me a new brake. Perfect, I can wait for that. In the meantime, I'll use it without the brake. And then a couple days after that, I see this post on Facebook. So while cold testing, they found an issue where when it's cold, sometimes you can't connect to the mount. It only affected 10% of batch 2 users. And guess who was part of that 10%? I had connection issues in the past when it was a little bit cold, but I didn't think too much of it. It would eventually work because I would turn the mount on and off, and it would, I guess it would warm up a little bit and it would connect. But March 2nd was actually the first time I set my mount outside for multiple nights because I had clear nights 3 nights in a row, which rarely happens. So I just left it outside polar line. And on March 2nd, I could not get this thing to turn on. But by the time evening hit, I knew that it was going to be a problem. So what I did was I taped on some hand warmers to the front, left it there for a couple hours, and luckily it warmed the metal housing enough that I was able to turn it back on. And I did have a clear night that third night, so I actually just left the mount on for the remaining 36 hours or so. Because once you turn it off, no guarantee that you'll be able to connect to it if it's too cold. So conversation with Min once again, and he said he'll send me a new control board which had the defect with the bad capacitor. So this is the control board that I removed. Kind of neat to see how this works, and I was able to remove it, replace it pretty easily. So he sent me both, a new brake and a new control board. Once I switched them out, everything just worked perfectly. March 27th was the first time I got to test the new control board and the new brake, and that was my first actually good imaging night, headache-free, where the mounting was near perfect at all times using my ASCAR 120 Apple, which is not a light telescope. April and May were crazy months for me, so this video got pushed back further and further, and now I'm finishing it. But since then and now, I've only had 14 sessions. It's been really bad for weather. And I had 8 amazing sessions, 3 really excellent sessions, and some 3 bad sessions, but those were some really poor seeing nights, so I can't blame the SAL-33. But one of those excellent sessions was my first light with the ASCAR 131F. When the seeing conditions got okay, it tracked so well. I was really impressed with it. And then when I put on my 91F later on to test it, I was getting an RMS of between 0.38 and 0.45 from my backyard here in Boston, which is rare. And the seeing conditions were average. If I got this mount now, like in the summertime, and I probably wouldn't have had any of those issues. And I probably would have gone crazy in December and January when it got colder because, this thing worked for 6 months. What's going on? Why is it not working now? So I'm kind of glad I got it when I did, even though it was a big time suck for me because, as you know, on this channel, I review gear, I test gear as much as I can with the limited clear skies that I have. So it was frustrating trying to, troubleshoot this and test other gear and try to make videos. So there was a lot of time spent there, but I'm kind of glad I got it over with in the beginning. Then, we use it for 6 months and then have to deal with issues that randomly appeared. And I don't know if I can take credit for it, but I think that they started cold testing inside a freezer after all the reported issues that came from my end. But on the bright side, I learned a lot about this mount. They claim that this is user serviceable, and I am a prime example that this is completely user serviceable. I opened this up, I've lost count, I tried to keep count, but it was a couple dozen times at least in the first few months. So I can take this out apart, put it back together really easily, really quickly. And on top of that, I got to really test Min and ML Astro's support. They stayed excellent throughout the whole thing, and one of the reasons that even though I thought about asking for, what the return policy was, I never went through with it just because of the kind of responses, the timely responses, and the willingness to help. I'm really impressed with them. I'm really glad we went through this together, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the SAL-33 does for me over the next years. Speaking about the future, the SAL-33 will be compatible with their new robotic polar alignment system, and I'm really looking forward to trying that out. So I think that's going to be a purchase that I make. They're also coming out with the SAL-66, rebranding as the ML Astro 1, which is going to be a much higher payload. It looks really interesting, and people on my Discord have asked me, am I going to get that? And my answer is probably no, because it's going to cost $2,500 when it comes out, another $649 for the robotic polar alignment, plus shipping. And I buy a lot of gear to test, and I test a lot of gear, and it's a lot of money. I already spent a lot of money this year, so I really don't see myself getting one of those. I would love to test one. I would love to give it a shot, but I don't see myself buying one, mostly because of the financial reasons and not because of, I don't think it'll be good because, this is an example that, even if it comes out not great, you can make it great. And some of you know that I'm sending some gear down to Death Valley observatories in a few weeks at a dark site to be hosted. And a few of you have asked me, hey, am I sending the SAL-33 down there? And my answer is, again, no, for a couple of reasons. First is branded for me. So I would love to feature this more in my channel because, it's right there. It's a built-in watermark, and I like looking at it. The second is, although I do trust this thing to work now, 6 or 7 weeks of good guiding, good imaging after 8 weeks of not good imaging isn't enough time for me to trust to send this down to a remote observatory, just in case. Like, what if something else fails? What if, the brakes that I got can't stand the heat of Death Valley? Which probably will, because, it can stand the heat in Vietnam. It gets really hot there, too. And the third reason I'm not sending something down there is because the operators of the observatory aren't familiar with the SAL-33, or at least I'm not sure if they're familiar. So I want to send something that they can troubleshoot if something happens. So I'm sending down a ZWO AM5. It'll be more than good enough for the telescope and imaging gear that I'm sending. But maybe in the future, maybe if for some reason, somehow I do get myself an ML Astro 1, maybe I'll send that down to another observatory or switch that out for the AM5 in the future. I don't know what the future holds, but at least for now, the ML Astro, or the SAL-33, is staying with me at home. I want to close out this video by saying a huge thanks to Min and his team at ML Astro for bearing with me with all the back and forth, with all of the complaints that I've made about this. I hope that I was able to help discover issues with this and help solve them. Great job on making such a nice product. I do wish you all the success. I'm looking forward to seeing what the robotic polar alignment tool does and how the ML Astro one does. And also a big shout out to all my patrons on Patreon, my supporters on Buy Me a Coffee, and here on YouTube. I'm able to make these videos because you give me the motivation and the confidence to do so. If you'd like to join this list of wonderful people, please check out the links in the description and the pinned comment below. Until next time, clear skies.